there's so much investment in healthcare right now.
What is charge capture?
They now have to understand they have to be involved and they have to be engaged.
Hello and welcome to the RevTechRX Podcast powered by Avlead. I'm David Kozlowski, and today we're talking about manual versus automated revenue reconciliation. I am joined again by Javad Sheikh, CEO of Avlead, Laura Fox, Director of Revenue Cycle Services, and Greg Forshee, VP of Client Success. Welcome back to this episode. Manual versus automated reconciliation. So if we're jumping right into it, the first question that I have for you is let's first define what charge reconciliation is.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion depending on who you ask and there's revenue reconciliation, there's charge reconciliation, a lot of the similar terminology is used out there, but there's really kind of two parts. So if anybody ever asks you, what do you do for charge reconciliation? There's systems or your master file synchronization or reconciliation, but there's also the actual day-to-day transactional reconciliation of reconciling your clinical and your financial transactions. I mean, that gets very confusing. So depending on who you're talking to, those can mean very different things.
Good deal. All right. Well, we finally got the definition. It sounds like there's no arguments or rebuttals. I guess then one of my questions is what are the ways that today providers are manual? First off, manual seems kind of crazy to me, right? I don't go to hospitals every day. And if I do, usually I'm sick. So explain to me how providers today are manually doing this.
If we're talking about the charge reconciliation piece right now, they are literally keeping a printed schedule of their patients from yesterday, and then a list of charges that need to be captured for those patients. And then once they capture those charges, they use that schedule to go back and virtually look to see, did I capture a charge for every patient that I saw yesterday? Not necessarily did I capture every charge correctly yesterday, but did I capture a charge for every patient that I saw yesterday? Very long, drawn-out process, timely, not the best use of someone's time. So
can any errors happen in this process?
Oh heavens, yes. And the main error is going to be that I didn't capture everything that I did yesterday. I either have to review the documentation for yesterday to figure out what I may or may not be missing, or just literally talk to the person who did the activities with the patient yesterday to ensure that I've captured everything for that patient.
So I got to ask the dumb question, I guess. What's the reasoning for doing manual reconciliation?
Well, I think there's multiple parts to it, right? Doing the reconciliation itself, and I think this is where it gets more confusing, where it's in some cases semi-automated as well. So some healthcare systems will say, hey, I'm able to get a report out of my clinical system and a report out of my financial system, and I can do a tic-tac approach. To them, that's automated because they're getting reports. But even that process can vary by department. So because your charge capture processes are different by department, like radiology is different, pharmacy is different, and kind of so on. So the other part of it is there truly is logic involved in doing it manually versus automated, because as Laura mentioned, it's more than just saying if they're both there, right? Is it accurate or correct or not? And I think that's where the other piece is that automation helps. And doing that is not easy, right? Putting that business logic in place to say, hey, how can I look at this and a system or computer or business rules or some predictive analytics in place that can check that is why it's so hard. And that's why it's still manual in a lot of different places.
Yeah, you talk about how it's difficult, right? Out of curiosity, are there any individuals who maybe don't believe it's possible to be automated? There's no way that it's going to be right. It's too difficult, right? And they just stay with the manual process, or is that just what's your thoughts? I'm being sincere here.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it sounds like you make it sound very difficult. Is it possible that people don't believe that it can be automated?
Oh yeah, we've run into that, right? And I'll let Greg. We've had a client, well, one of their vendors basically said, nope, this is impossible. You can't do it, right? And then 2 years later, we're doing it very well for them today, as well too. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of pushback. It's like, oh, you can't do this, and we've got some smart people who've done it before manually, and we've got some good technology people that figured it out.
Yeah, Laura, you mentioned when you first started that there's a lot of time put into this in the manual process. What does it look like, manual versus automated? How much time are we talking?
Oh, you're talking hours versus minutes. So you can take your reconciliation, a manual process that could take you up to 2 hours a day, down to 15 to 30 minutes a day, depending on your department and what your actual workflow is for capturing charges. It can be really reduced down so that you can get back to your clinical activities and you're not spending time in the office, ticking and tying constantly.
Yeah. You say that. Do we have any examples of anybody that you can think of hospitals that are like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that we've adopted an automated process where it actually saved time, and maybe they were against or resistant against at first, like kind of like we were discussing with the external vendor.
I think one of the departments that really benefits from an automated process is a surgical department, where they know they have X number of cases scheduled for yesterday. They know how to use their clinical system to document all their surgeries. But then when the information comes out on the back end, on the charging end, how they can use an automated system to capture the things that are truly missing from that case, along with the things that they did capture.
So do a lot of hospitals or providers know that an automated process is actually available?
I think it's mixed. So I go back to a lot of the confusing part of this. There's a lot of products or solutions out there in the market that basically say, hey, we're going to go out there and find you missing charges, or we're going to do this reconciliation for you. And majority of the time, or if not all the time, is just people manually going in there and having the expertise to identify, hey, that this should match to this, but they're basically looking at Excel reports or VLOOKUPs and doing these comparisons manually, or consultants that are doing all this work manually. That gets marketed or communicated as, hey, here's a solution or an automated solution. So that's one of the challenges we're fighting at Avelead, at least, is just getting that knowledge out there to say, hey, that there truly is a new solution and it's different, and it's not systems comparison, it's actually transactional comparison.
How can someone identify that? If I'm a hospital and I'm potentially purchasing a product to automate it, how can I identify that it's actually a solution and a tool versus a VLOOKUP and employees actually chipping away at it?
I think an easy way to figure out is like, all right, how long does it take? And what's involved in doing it. If they tell you, hey, we can do this reconciliation and look back 3 months or 6 months, that's definitely a manual process that they have a consultant, versus tools or true automation is like, hey, we can run this for your previous day daily, right? It's something that you can do on an ongoing basis, because that's impossible for humans to do daily, right? Or it would be very tedious to be able to do that.
Are there any other benefits besides the time that is spent on the? You're smiling.
I am smiling because this is going to bring up that big thing, accuracy of our charging, of our charge capture process, of our actual workflow of what we did with those patients yesterday. And did we complete all the activities that we had for yesterday? Within an automated system, you can point out not only what you captured, but what you didn't capture, so that you can go back and then complete that activity, so that you can then capture the charges that you may have missed yesterday.
So how does that work? I'm dealing with paper every day. I know this paper tells me exactly what I need to do and what I didn't do the day prior, right? I don't understand how that works.
So for us, the way it works is that we use your clinical activities as your starting point. What clinical activities did you have yesterday that are truly deemed as chargeable activities? And then did that charge get captured against that clinical activity? Yes or no? That's what we can tell you at this point. And so then within that, then you get to make a decision clinically, should I have captured that charge yesterday, yes or no?
It seems like a lot of trust that somebody has to believe that this product and this application is actually going to work. So that resistance is probably pretty high, I'm assuming, at first, potentially.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the testing and the validation comes in, right? And there's a lot of testing and validation that occurs. And the other part of it, it's so different by department. That's the other area where we look at the business rules to make sure you're reconciling accurately as well, too. One thing you kind of mentioned, right, the whole manual process, and someone's looking at this stuff at the department level, there's accuracy and then consistency and speed, right? It's you're not checking it every day, or you're not checking it the same thing. The other part, like the next level, is the predictive analytics piece, right? To say, hey, I did a surgery. Did I also charge for anesthesiology, right? So someone who's manually doing that can't be able to have that database of things to look against. So that's another layer of level that makes it more accurate and gives you opportunities for missing charges as well.
How there's a lot of solutions out there that claim to do this, and you said something: accuracy, consistency, and speed. Are they all not hitting the mark? Do they hit the mark? And you don't have to go into details of them, but I'm just curious. And with that, how's the implementation process in most of those tools? Like, is it super heavy? It sounds heavy. And then you mentioned testing. I mean, this is a long-winded question, so I apologize. But the testing part too, you said, does that happen in every hospital? When you go to implement a product to move them from manual to automated I'm assuming you have to test, correct?
Yeah. It's more after the fact for day-to-day operations, I think. There's a lot of solutions out there that will be as accurate or will be as consistent, right? But if you've got 6 months to do that and you're looking 6 months back, yeah, you can be accurate and you can be consistent. But then speed is an issue. Then you have others that will try to do speed, but what they're really doing is maybe just comparing the charge master systems reconciliation that we were talking about before. So it's not always apples to apples. We had a client where, one of our largest clients, where we kind of went through this. We went through the comparison process, and you have so many stakeholders where one person understands you're doing a systems comparison, another person thinks you're doing a charge daily activity comparison, and we just kind of had a level set conversation and start from top to bottom. This is what we're doing. We're going to compare systems A to system B, make sure your charge master and everything is accurate, your pricing, CPT codes, all that stuff is accurate, and then sync across all those systems. And then once that's done, then we can make sure your daily transactional data is right. So just having that little conversation, that last sentence I said, just going through that in an hour conversation and making sure that everybody understands that is definitely helps.
And how much weight does this actually take to implement into a hospital? And because when I'm hearing this, and if I'm a provider, you're going to remove my trust, my piece of paper that I know is accurate, right? And yes, I can maybe make some mistakes, but now you're going to remove it from me. And Laura, I think we were discussing is either before this, and when you do that, that's a problem for them. And now, how long does it take to actually implement this? How long are we talking? And I don't know. That just seems a very stressful situation.
What we've seen, it's anywhere from 60 to 90 days for implementation for that cycle. But we do encourage them to, we say, we know you have trust in the paper. We know you've been doing something a certain way for X amount of years. We encourage you, bring that piece of paper. When we start to validate the system, let's compare what you have on that piece of paper that you're in love with to what's actually in the system, and you show us any discrepancies that you have. And once they do that for a couple of weeks, they start to realize, yeah, there's nothing that's missing. Everything that's on this piece of paper is in the system. And once they get that comfort level, that's when they feel really, really good about, I'm ditching the paper, I'm burning it, and I'm never going to use it again. But they do typically have to go through that process, see it, proof is in the pudding, and they finally accept it, and they move on. So.
We've had the opposite, where people have the aha moment where they think their paper is different, and it turns out our tool is actually usually right.
Yep.
So.
Well, and the other thing with the paper system is once you realize that I've made a mistake, I have to create another piece of paper to fix that mistake. Where in an automated system, you might have to put a note in there, but at least it tracks what you've done without you adding to that paper that you just had in your stack, or giving it to someone else to do. That's the thing too, is the automated system lets you track and follow what needs to be done to get those charges where they need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because what we've seen a lot of times is you'll say, hey, you think you're doing it on paper, you think you're doing it well. Yeah, we do. And we say, so when you find a miss, right, you went through those 50 pieces of paper and you actually said, oh yeah, this was a whoopsie. We actually missed something. We said, now what do you do? Mm-hmm. And they say, oh, well, we either give them that piece of paper or we email them or we do something. Mm-hmm. And we say, okay, great. So how do you know that ever gets done? Like that the email got read or that they took the piece of paper and actually cared about what you told them to do? And they say, well, we don't know. And so what we've seen a lot is it just falls into the abyss, right? Nothing actually ever got done. That same person that you gave it to that missed it the first time was busy the second time and didn't do it again. And they have no idea of ever knowing that without having a system to be able to track that in an automated way. So
I read an article by an organization that essentially said that when you're implementing an automated revenue reconciliation process, that there's no way it takes 90 days. No such thing as a turnkey solution. What's your rebuttal to that?
My first question is, do you know what the hell you're doing? I guess it's just being blunt there. And to me, it's probably somebody who doesn't have the expertise, hasn't done this before, and they sure as hell haven't done it 100 times, like a company who would be able to do something in 90 days. Therefore, they're trying to solve this math problem and solve it as they're kind of going, right? So that, I don't know, that's my initial thought, just being candid.
I think, people are, have a hard time because the very first one that we did took us about, maybe I was going to say about a year, right? When we're kind of going, or maybe even less than that. And we got to a point where we were deploying this in 6 months. So when we say 60 to 90 days, it's not something that just said, all right, we've come up with overnight. So we've gone through that process, had those lessons learned, kind of applied them. And once you've done something a few times, right, you kind of get a good, you know what the gotchas are. And we've kind of gotten to that point where we can just repetitively do it, in a 60 to 90 day time period. So experience and history would be the answer if someone asked that question.
And as long as the site gives us their side also, gives us the time to do it with their people, we can do it. If they don't have the time to do it right now, yes, it could take longer. But if they have the time and will allow us that time with their staff, we'll get it done.
And through having this process, obviously, of moving to automated improves your revenue integrity. Are there any other elements that you can think of that, not to get too off topic, but what does a team look like that basically helps benefit revenue integrity, or rather make sure that it is done correctly?
I think that before answering that question, you almost have to, and there's two ways that most hospitals, or maybe three, that they do revenue reconciliation on a daily basis. One, either they're not doing it at all. Two is what I've seen is either department directors are doing it within hospitals, or that it's centralized between like a revenue integrity department. So depending on what model they're doing, I think the resources needs might be different.
Mm-hmm.
What does
Correct.
the department typically look like?
Well, the department can be, again, it's that same team that it took just to look at the financial health. It's going to be your CFO, your CNO. That's going to be your financial and your clinical side. Then it's going to be your department directors. Then it's going to be your IT team, which may be your revenue integrity team. All developed into one team. So it's going to take that many people to put this structure together and understand it.
And how much time would you say is involved?
A lot of times they say, oh, how much additional staff are we going to have to hire? And we said, actually, it's the opposite. Let's spend less resources doing this manual kind of legwork and repurpose those folks, or have them focus on other initiatives that are actually valuable and not wasting their time doing this manual approach. So we typically say it's less people, and it's usually the staff that you have on board anyway. Department directors exist, CFO exists, CNO exists, revenue integrity staff typically exists at these hospitals. So we're saying use the same staff. Don't hire anyone else, and let's go do this thing and do it well, working together. So what we've seen is that having that staff, to me, what I've seen, and Laura can validate or not validate because she knows how this thing goes, is if you have a department directors that are actually doing the reconciliation each day, and you have a really good revenue integrity staff and CFO that have oversight and make sure that the process is being done on a daily basis, answer any questions. They're typically the super users or the champions in the system. So usually department directors are physically doing the work with revenue integrity staff and CFO that are really oversight and making sure that everything is being done appropriately.
Sure. No, that's fair. You mentioned that it actually decreases time, right? How many staff do I get? It decreases time. What would you say like a benchmark ROI is from going from a manual to an automated process?
Well, I think the standard one that we use, and this is for a health system that was actually really good at reconciliation, they're spending about 2 hours a day for each department to do this manual process. We took it about 15 to 30 minutes, like Laura said, but think about that. That's every single day. So you're giving them an extra hour and a half for every department director. If you have 10 chargeable departments in your hospital, right, we're talking about real hours. And what we've seen for a 350-bed hospital, it's in the $200,000 to $300,000 range of cost savings that you have associated with putting that time back in your pockets. Go do something with patient care quality programs and other initiatives, and with that extra time that you have.
Yeah. Touching on the end of patient care, does this actually benefit patient care?
Well, I think it benefits the outcome of the patient care. So, because it will demonstrate that the patient is getting what activities were ordered or needed to be performed for that patient. Yes, I think in that aspect it does. So
Another aspect is just time, right? So if I'm a smaller hospital, that the department directors, if I'm not spending 2 hours doing this reconciliation process, that's an extra hour plus whatever that you can focus on patient care, right? And focus on, all right, let me coach my other nurses or my rad techs, or work with patients directly in some cases, because a lot of times in these smaller organizations, department director is providing direct patient care as well too.
Yeah.
So-
That's a good point you bring
Yeah.
up too. Is the automation of your charge reconciliation can actually impact your daily workflow. It can show you where the flaws are in your daily workflow, and you can improve those, which that will improve the outcome for the patient. And as you said, I get more bedside time with my patient instead of being at my desk or in front of a computer. So I do think in that way you can improve that.
Yeah.
And we've also had like chief medical officers who've seen this product, and they start looking at, like you said, looking at their clinical workflow or clinical utilization to make sure, hey, what is these nurses or physicians ordering, or and kind of auditing them from that aspect
That
as
is
well too.
very true. Very true. You know.
Real world scenario we've seen is we've seen that when you have a good solution, you're able to do reconciliation well each day. A real world example we had in the last couple of months was we had a hospital that they were ordering the same lab order on a patient 50, 60, 70 times. And they actually weren't performing well. Well, I hope they weren't, because that would have been painful. But they're like, we didn't realize that we were even doing that, right? We didn't know that our physicians were ordering this 50 times. But a lot of times it's because the physician probably didn't understand they were doing it either, or they didn't see something on their list, or they just didn't understand anything about the process that like we talked about. And so having a way to do this, if you don't have a way, you put your head in the sand, you would have no idea that you have a patient that has that same duplicate order on them 50, 60, 70 times. And that's obviously a patient care risk, or a risk associated with.
Yeah, when you talked about like ROI, when we talk about, finding missing charges that has revenue based, there's the time component of it as well too. But a big part of it is just things like that. Like if a physician has something in his order set or something, or if you have an end user that's making the same mistake every time, right? And it almost becomes a training tool to say, hey, you're doing this incorrectly in the system, or you're using the wrong order, or using the wrong med. This is what we want to use. So you're able to proactively address some of those items. So our kind of goal is let's get to a point where you don't need these tools, and it comes out to be a net zero. But that's the ideal tool. It's not we want to work ourselves out of business, but we want to make things life easier for the provider.
Yeah, what we always tell folks is, because I say, oh, are we going to get to zero at some point? I said, yeah, you wish. But I said, what it amounts to is your departments are never going to not be busy, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm never not going to have high volumes. My hospitals are always going to say, we want you to do more with less staff, right? So mistakes will always happen when you're really busy and you're kind of going 100 miles an hour, dealing with COVID patients and all these different things that they're having to deal with on a daily basis. You'll never get to a point where that staff is sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So you're always going to have mistakes. Getting to zero, it's probably more of a dream than it is a reality.
Resource change. We talk about new people coming and going, right?
That's right. Yep.
I think the thing that we try to emphasize to our clients is that you have the opportunity here again to improve that financial health of your hospital by capturing those charges that you've been missing all along, that you may not even noticed when you had a manual process, where in an automated process it's right there. You can see it. You've ordered something that hasn't been completed. That's a missing charge. When you complete that missing charge, that's more money to your bottom line. That's that financial health that you're trying to improve. If we look at it as an opportunity and not as a failure, we turn it to the positive, we're going to get a better outcome with this automation. And I think we try to spin that with our clients. This is going to give you an opportunity to improve that bottom line.
Yeah, and I think to that point, what we've seen more times than not, these departments don't miss things on purpose, right? You're not saying, hey, I'm actually just going to miss that I actually did this service for a patient, and I'm just going to not put it in the system. Most of the time it's accidental. When you show them with an automated approach, say, hey, look, here's the 3 that you missed. Most of the time, you're like, wow, I didn't realize that our staff missed that. Like we would have never seen it without an automated approach, because we would have glanced over it again. But it's really just encouraging them or talking to them and saying, hey, when we talk to their CFOs, your staff isn't doing this stuff purposely. We didn't just go and miss $5 million of charges this month on purpose, right? Nobody wants to actually do that. So it's really just making them understand that we all make mistakes. Most of us, Laura never makes a mistake, but the rest of us make mistakes. So just getting them to understand that we all do that. Let's have a way to find that and audit ourselves and correct the mistake and move on.
And that's the piece the CFOs love about this, because they're looking at the numbers, right? They're looking at the data, and we talked about value and ROI earlier. there's a time savings, there's a process improvement and efficiency, but there's also a bottom line dollar savings as well too, at least from a gross revenue perspective. Starting with the gross revenue, if you're talking about hundreds of $1,000s a month, or in some cases millions of dollars a month, that's what sells the CFOs on this stuff. The end users like the process improvement and the efficiency piece, and the CFOs like to see the dollars amount. So it's a win-win situation.
It is a win-win situation. The opportunities, it's there. Find it, fix it, get that bottom line up.
When I think of users and their experience with new processes of going from manual to automated, we obviously that involves a computer to some degree, and we all have computers in our pockets, right? The iPhones, whatever, and those involve updates and sometimes downtime and what have you. What does the maintenance look like for most of these applications that kind of get implemented into these hospitals?
I don't think there's a lot of actual maintenance in the automation tools themselves. It really comes down to change management of the content, right? Like we were talking about at the very beginning, you have regulatory updates, you have new items are added, you have pricing changes. So managing those changes impacts the automation or impacts how the configuration works. So fortunately, we've got tools and systems as part of that process to manage the change itself. So it's a change management tool along with a transactional auditing or monitoring tool as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll touch on quickly is for any updates or any of that stuff, we typically, we're so familiar with the process. We know that they're reconciling. They're doing this more of like a 9 to 5 type reconciliation. So when we take the system down or we make any sort of updates or any sort of maintenance requirements to our system, it's after those hours, right? We know that departments, unless you have the world's most boring life, you're not reconciling at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, right? So that's when we perform our updates. So there's no impact to the end users. They go in the next morning. They don't even know anything happened until we tell them what happened, and then they move on and they go on with their day with no impact to them at all. So,
yeah. Or hopefully they're not too busy all day where they can't do it until later.
That's right. Yeah, then they're.
So.
And a positive thing to a lot of our changes that get made, the changes come from them. It's maintaining what we have in the system, but it's what they need in the system, what they need to see, and how they need to see it. So
the hospital and the providers,
right, yeah. Yes. So getting their buy-in, because we say, look, let's look at this, let's look at that. You tell us how you want to see this, and then we're able to show it that way, or more of what they don't need to see than what they do need to see.
Yeah. There's a lot of things, and you obviously touched on others. There's so many inefficiencies in a hospital, right? In healthcare, it sounds like. So I'm excited to try to tackle all of these. Not today, but all of these. And I think we've kind of. Do you guys have anything else to say about automated versus manual reconciliation, or?
I think it kind of goes back. It's a no-brainer. I mean, that's where the future is. It's just more efficiency. It is. You're a dinosaur if you're not looking to automate already, and you might not be able to survive, right? It's the thrive and survive. And who's the nurse quote that we always go with?
Yeah, no margin, no mission. Right?
Yeah, no
Even
margin,
our
no mission.
nonprofits are
Wow.
hospitals that they're not in it for necessarily being a for-profit hospital trying to make a ton of money, but you have to have a margin to have a mission, or else it really won't matter. So,
yep.
So true.
Thanks for being here, guys, and thank you all for listening into the RevTechRX Podcast powered by Avely. I'm David Kozlowski. Hope to see you soon.